Welcome to the 6th Annual San Antonio Regional Education Forum. I'm Sarah Beret, CEO of Pre-K for SA. Pre-K for SA has been a proud supporter of the Education Forum since the forum's inception 6 years ago. From the beginning, we knew that Bexar County would be better poised to address the challenges of the 21st century if we could harness the collective will, expertise, and resources of our community's civic, business, and nonprofit leaders and connect them to educators to address key challenges and opportunities before us. Over the last 6 years, we've had important conversations about how to improve quality and access in our education system. Those conversations have demonstrated that it will take all of us working collectively to create a system in which every child and youth in Bexar County has access to high quality education. Those conversations have also demonstrated that consensus is possible regardless of the sector you work in or what part of town you live in. Perhaps most importantly, those conversations have demonstrated that our community can be galvanized behind education. As a member of the Planning Committee, I could not be more proud of the work that we have done over the last several years to bring these important topics front and center. And yet, even with all of that work, there is no way that we could have been prepared for the pandemic of 2020 and the sweeping changes it would bring to our institutions and systems. Today's session focuses on how educators, civic, business, and nonprofit leaders came together to address the collective pressures of the pandemic. These are powerful stories, and we are honored to share them with you. On behalf of the Planning Committee, I want to welcome all of you to the 6th Annual San Antonio Regional Education Forum. And now I'd like to introduce Angie, publisher and CEO of the San Antonio Report, without which this event would not be possible.
Thank you, Dr. Beret. Welcome to the second virtual conversation in the 2021 San Antonio Regional Education Forum, Teaching and Learning During a Pandemic. Our program is part of a community effort to connect educators with the broader community to explore the most pressing issues, challenges, and opportunities of the day. These critical conversations were made free to the public this year, thanks to the support of our incredible sponsors. And we want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our sponsors that partnered with us to make this year's virtual forum free and accessible to all. A special thank you to our 2021 leadership sponsors, Mike and Louise Burke and Pre-K for SA, and our gold sponsors, the Gambrinus Company, First Mark Credit Union, Schulman Lopez Hoffer and Adelstein, LLP, Idea Public Schools, Valero, and the Charles Butt Foundation. And for a full list of our sponsors, visit our forum website linked in the chat during today's program. Because these virtual events are free, we encourage you to share this live stream and help us ensure that these critical conversations are reaching everyone in the community. And thank you, of course, to the members of the San Antonio Report team and Forum Planning Committee who have really worked together as a team to make this series possible. If you value local education reporting and civic engagement events like this, I ask that you really consider providing a donation of any amount in support of our nonprofit newsroom. Your donations allow us to report on critical education matters throughout the entire year. So you can click on the donate button on our homepage or check out the donation link in the chat. Thank you. I'd like to get started and introduce the first group of panelists. We'll start with first with Nick Garcia, Teach for America San Antonio Executive Director, Andy Keller, Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute President and CEO, and Jessica Weaver, Communities in Schools San Antonio CEO. And starting with you, Nick, if you'll just take 1 minute and introduce yourself and your organization.
Of course. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this. And I'm really eager to hear and learn alongside the panelists here. My name is Nick Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of Teach for America San Antonio, where we serve primarily the urban core of our city. We're an organization that recruits our nation's most promising future leaders and asks them to make an initial commitment to 2 years in urban or rural schools across the country. And so San Antonio is one of 51 regions across the country that offer this programming. I'm very excited to share more about us as we continue.
Thank you, Nick. Andy.
Well, thanks, Angie. Happy to be here today. I'm Andy Keller. I'm a clinical psychologist, but my job is actually working at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, where we do data-driven, nonpartisan policy and program research and practice research to try to help just achieve one goal, to help Texans have access to the best mental health supports, just like they do for other health supports for like cancer or for heart disease. So we work across the state. We do a lot of work here in San Antonio with a lot of partners, including schools, education service centers, nonprofits. And what we're really trying to do is to make sure that schools have a plan on how they can approach the mental health needs and emotional wellness needs of their students and educators, as well as making sure the community has the supports in place they need to support schools in that mission. So it's great to be here today and to be part of this discussion.
Great, thank you. And Jessica.
Hi, thank y'all. Thank y'all for having us and representing our community here in San Antonio. So I'm Jessica Weaver and CEO for Communities and Schools of San Antonio. And I'll start with our mission, which really explains surrounding our students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school. And where we do that is in our schools. We partner with 13 school districts across the city, and we support our schools by providing that integrated student supports within the school for those students and families who are just seeing obstacles that are getting in the way of their success and meeting their greatest potential. And so we are that bridge for our students to connect with the resources that are available to them, either in the school or throughout the city, and just to be a support system to them in overcoming any of those obstacles that they may be facing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. As everyone can see, we have a great group of panelists today. So let's get started. I want to start with a couple of questions to kind of tell us what it was like fulfilling your organizational mission during the pandemic. What worked, what didn't work, and what was the most valuable lesson you learned about students during the pandemic? Nick.
Yeah, the pandemic represented the biggest risk that we've ever seen in education, and in particular for students in marginalized communities, this risk was massive. So it caused an existential question. We really asked the question: is a core of who we believe to be incredible future leaders coming into the classroom the thing that we need? And so we started by asking our superintendents, do you anticipate having this need for new educators in this moment in time? They replied emphatically, yes, we still need that support of that influx of new talent coming into the city of San Antonio. And so we were really proud to immediately stand up what is usually an in-person, very intensive summer set of programming for these folks, many of whom who weren't considering education prior to graduating from college. We moved that entirely virtually in a matter of about 8 weeks. Had a very intensive program, have continued that. So now we're entering our second year of summer virtual teacher training that's going on right now across the state of Texas and across the broader country. And, we learned a lot about our students. We learned a lot about our community. But what I'll say last is I've been very proud to see our mission coming to life, because we ask people to join education. And the vast majority of whom end up remaining in the field of education. So we saw our alumni leaders just contributing in powerful ways. I think of Principal Nungaray, who joined the Corps in 2010. He served as a co-chair for the Mayor's Pre-K through 12 Council as they were considering how to address COVID, did innovative practices. He's also the principal of my students, my twins who are in second grade there now. I saw our Dash Youngsaver, another alumni from 2017. He hosted a TEDx San Antonio conversation about how to really innovate in the classroom and serve our students virtually. And I could go on and on through the list, but I do think that there was a real clear need to be innovative in our response to our students this past year.
Thanks, Nick. So, Jessica, tell us, what was it like fulfilling your mission, and what did you learn, and what's the most important thing you learned about students learning during a pandemic?
So there's a lot of lessons, right? But I think the one critical thing that we've taken from this is it's confirmed how schools are a hub to our community and to our families. It's definitely confirmed the need for our schools to be not necessarily do everything, use support systems, but to be the center of where our families are looking and seeking the support that they need. And so I think for us, it confirmed our work in the schools, and having the relationship across students and the adults in the building really helped us to really bridge the gaps of the communication, or even just enhance the communication for our families who often, sometimes systems seem easy, but systems can be difficult. And so our staff played a huge role in being that bridge across those networks, and not just systems of schools, but there were support systems across the city that were there for our families, right? Being there to connect them to those resources and just that unknown. And I think that kind of probably has been the biggest confirmation around our schools are a huge hub and are the center of a lot of our kids' lives, and not just education. And so I think that's the biggest one. And I feel also that what we learned about our students is that they have a lot of the answers. Just ask them what works and what doesn't work, and they are pretty accurate about what really did work and doesn't work. And so I feel like spending more time with also their family members allowed us to do work that we hadn't done in the past, or just didn't have the capacity to do. And I think we've reinvigorated the need to have more connection with the families, because our families did stay in greater connection during COVID and pandemic time. So I think those are our greatest lessons so far.
I like that.
But there are a lot of lessons.
I'm sure. I like that. Just ask the student. That's fantastic. Andy, what about you?
Well, we saw many of the same things that Nick and Jessica mentioned, including, I think, Jessica's last point about the amazing resilience of students, of educators, of families. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it that we actually got largely, I mean, we're not totally through this, but we've gotten through so much in the last year. We also spent a lot of time looking at our team. I mean, it was hard. I think every organization had to look at how are we going to get through. And I think every organization that employs parents of school-aged children got a renewed sense of the importance of teachers, because all of a sudden everybody was ramping up home schools, right? And so we had to rework our work protocols to be able to accommodate that and support our staff and their friends. And fortunately, we were able to do that. But and it's hard for folks. So I think that hub idea that Jessica says, just really, I think we all understood that in a new way. We pivoted our work to really try to look out, like, what is this going to be like, since it was an unprecedented thing. We did, unfortunately, here in Texas, we know all too well what it's like to go through natural disasters and big events. So we knew that probably mental health was going to get worse. I mean, I think all of us sort of started to realize that, but we kind of started right in on that in the middle of March, did a bunch of projections that unfortunately have turned out to be true. I mean, most folks have gotten through this without mental health impacts, and I think we need to remember that. But unfortunately, about 3 times as many people across the state, including students, report mental health needs, anxiety and depression in particular, higher than usual. And so getting ready for that. And then I think the other thing we really tried to do was to help our partners, particularly at the Texas Child Mental Health Care Consortium, which is a consortium of all the medical schools across the state, who really started last spring ramping up a statewide program to make urgent mental health needs supports available in schools that may not have a CIS or may not have some of the other on the ground resources that they need. And frankly, I think every school needed more resources just, as we emerge this fall. And now, unfortunately, we're seeing things tick up even more, which is often what happens once the disaster's over. That's when the emotional mental health needs can come to the forefront. So those were probably the biggest shifts we made.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that work with the medical students. That's fantastic. So next, we'd kind of like to learn more about, so after this whole year of distant learning, what will the next school year be like? Will it be a return to the status quo, or is the learning environment changed in ways that you think suggest maybe a new dynamic, different needs in place, or in the classroom or at home? If you want to take it, Nick?
Sure, I'll start. One of the things that was fascinating to come out recently was EdWeek's Research Center did a poll that was nationally representative of teachers across the country. And there was a lot of statistics, encourage people to go check out that article. But the two that stood out to me were that 55% of teachers said that during the pandemic, they were giving their students more flexibility in how they completed their assignments, in even what the assignments they were choosing to do. And that almost half of our teachers as well were decreasing the amount of time they spent lecturing. And I think, whether or not we across the state or in San Antonio have a hybrid model with our students, this concept of giving students agency, to Jessica's point, they have a lot of it within them already. Asking them how they can complete work, how they can complete assignments, really being attuned to what they bring into our classrooms is something that I certainly hope stays with us. And again, whether we're virtual, in person, or hybrid, that is a concept that we can take and run with as educators. And so I think that is one thing that I would really like to see maintain or continue. And then I think Jessica and Andy can speak a lot more to the social and emotional learning, the trauma-informed practices that I think are going to be critical about overlapping with our schools. So I'll pause there and let them add.
That's great. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, I really think that coming into the new school year, there really has to be dedicated time, not recommended time, but dedicated time for students and teachers to have just to reset every day, just to think about social and emotional, just where you are for the day, and it become part of the structure of every teacher's day. And not every teacher will be comfortable with that to begin with, and so I do think that there needs to be time in professional development to help teachers learn how to do this within their instruction time. And so I hope that there is a commitment and a dedication to not just want that for our students, but to help teachers get to that point. Because often it's really difficult to find professional development time on that topic and give that time to that. But I do think that I'm hoping that that will be a huge part of the recommended professional development for our adults, because our adults are really the ones who need to model that for our students. We're going to have students who have not been in a classroom for that long of a time and have had to sit in the classroom. We're going to have teachers who haven't had that many students in the classroom in a while. And so understanding how to use some of their time to allow for students to understand their emotions, to also understand there's going to be a class of 20 plus students who have all had different experiences through this time, and some more traumatic and some less traumatic. And how do you address all of those same issues in one class? And then actually schools understanding where teachers can find that support system. So when CIS is there, that's helpful. But as Andy mentioned, not everyone has it. But how do you embed that into your culture of learning for your adults in the room, but also giving them, the adults, some time to have some self-care as well? Because it will be a huge change in the beginning of this school year, managing all the different emotions that are coming into a classroom at one time. So those are some of the things and changes I hope that we'll see and that we'll give time to, because we can't expect it to happen if we don't give dedicated time to that.
So that's interesting. So how do you, because that sounds, what you both have said sounds super important, but how do you move that with so many different school districts? How do you move that from a hope to a policy?
Well, I'm happy to jump in on that one. I mean, first of all, I think you have to make a decision that you want to do that. And I think that's one thing that I think we all realized during the pandemic is that, I mean, really, emotional wellness is the status quo. I mean, Raise Your Hand Texas the last 2 years on their survey and have seen educators, parents recognizing that emotional wellness is something we have to pay attention to. And just because it's part of development, it's part of healthy development. And we're not going to be able to learn if we don't do that. So now we've all seen this huge uptake, 3 times the rates of prior mental health needs, 30+% increase in emergency room visits by students, by adolescents, 50% increase for young women and girls. So it's more than ever essential that there be a policy at the school level to say, how do we have a multi-tiered system of supports in place, and to put a plan in place. And TEA is working on standards for that, and there's people who can help with that. But I think what we recognize is, and when you have a partner like CIS, you can really do that in partnership with them to try to figure out that comprehensive piece. But there has to be a set of policies in place. And I think they need to address, like Jessica was saying, the wellness of the adults in children's lives, both the educators and their families, because it's not enough to just sort of try to focus on the mental health and the emotional wellness of the child. So that, I think that's probably the most important thing, Angie, from my place, is just decide you're going to have a policy, and then look anew at the policies you have and make sure it's not just the school doing it, but you've got community partners, because schools don't take on childhood diabetes or childhood cancer by themselves. They do it in partnership with health systems and with others in the community. So we really need to, I think, all come together for that.
That's fantastic. Public schools, in Bexar County and across the country, but in Bexar County specifically, have received hundreds of millions of dollars in stimulus funding from the federal government. And what we are curious about is, will this money simply cover some of those existing gaps, or can it be actually used to help redefine the education experience? What do you think is needed in terms of resources to address the fallout from the pandemic? Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I think the roots of federal funding, if you look to something like Title I schools, it really are about equity for our underprivileged communities, and I'm hopeful to see that continue. That the way we're spending money is grounded in our national civil rights laws from the 1960s. What I think that looks like in San Antonio, or I hope, is I think we've had some school districts be excellent, the majority of our school districts in San Antonio, about closing the digital divide, but we still have a lot of way to go in terms of that. I don't think we're going to walk back or go to a world where we don't have one-to-one devices, as an example, or we don't have a critical need for internet to be at home. These are things that we've been building towards as a society over years and decades, and that is a place that I think we're going to need to invest some of those dollars. I also think what this conversation we've been having is critical. So a focus on mental health and social emotional needs, whether that's investing in counselors in the school, in programs like Communities in Schools, or programs like Teach for America, where we're investing in additional supports for educators who are already there, so that there's this additional training that can happen for our educators across the district. And finally, I do think that there are some things that we know to be best practice, that are research based, that we can scale. I think about my own twins, who, they're 7 right now. They have 2 parents who are former educators or have been long-term educators. I know that they're reading behind grade level, and I'm worried about their ability to catch up. And I extrapolate that to the thousands of other families in our city and what they're facing and how that feels like an uphill battle. And so I do think programs like high quality intensive tutoring that focuses both on academics, but also the social emotional needs of our students is a real opportunity that we have with these federal dollars. I mean, there's billions of dollars in the state of Texas right now that we can invest in our students. And my advocacy would be that we just don't lose sight of that as a country or as a city, as a one-time need.
Great. Jessica, these are what Nick just described are some really great areas of focus for these dollars. But do you think that the money will simply cover the existing gaps, or do you think it's going to be used to redefine the education process in some of the ways Nick just described?
Yeah, without knowing every district's full plan on what they're moving into, I will talk about the area around social emotional and mental health. The conversations that I've had with districts, I think, kind of goes along with Andy. I think as a whole, the conversations I've had with the districts have been that they put kind of a stake in the ground and that they're prioritizing social emotional and mental health. And they are using these resources to enhance the supports that they're going to offer their students. and the opportunity to also support their teachers in learning and how to support their students as well in this area. So I have heard that and seen that in their planning and their requests and what they're trying to achieve. And so, so I definitely feel hopeful that our Bexar County schools have really put a stake in the ground and said, we have this opportunity to kind of change this. Not that we've never believed in it, but to change this. Now we have some resources that we can put towards it. And many have prioritized this area as one of their top priorities in how they're going to expend some of their funds in this area. So that makes me hopeful that this may be, I know that this is a 3-year, potentially 4-year cycle, but if we can change the systems and how they think and how they see this priority, then we can see that for the long term, and those resources will be allocated in different ways for the future after this, large sum of monies are expended in the next 3 to 4 years. So I do see some hopeful signs that this has become a priority, and I think it's just been, obvious in the face of everyone that we've had. Our students need this, and now it's not theory. Now we went through a pandemic, and it's understood. Like, okay, we've got to invest in this, and this is what I've seen, and this is what I've heard, and this is how I see that our districts are doing as a whole. For those that I'm most involved in, and that's several of them, I've seen that commitment to the social emotional mental health part of our students. So it's quite.
Andy, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I'm really encouraged by what Jessica and Nick are saying. I pray that people don't do status quo. I mean, this isn't going to happen again. We're not going to get another $17 billion to spend, over a 3-year period to make some changes. And I'm really encouraging. I mean, the schools and the education service centers we work with across the state are seeing that. They understand that. And they also understand, too, that the legislature is framing this as one time. And so they really have to look at things that are going to really take things up to the SES to a new level. And I think Nick's point about equity has to be kept in mind, because it's not just the existing inequities, it's also the inequity of COVID. I mean, working age Latinos in this state, we lost at 4 times the rate of other folks. African American Black children, 50% more likely to lose a parent. So in addition to the existing inequities, the emotional inequities from grief, from loss, are disproportionately falling on Texans of color, and disproportionately falling on all Texans who are uninsured, who lack access to healthcare, who are in poverty. So I think we really have to look at that. And so a couple things to keep in mind. One is telehealth. 98% or more of the mental health and emotional health needs of children can be met through telehealth. It's great if you have someone in person, and some things do require in-person case management, but the vast majority, especially if we detect them early, can happen through telehealth. So thank goodness the legislature took unprecedented steps to putting telehealth, including audio-only telehealth, which works pretty darn well while we're waiting for broadband to get to everybody. So to put that in the plan. And I think the second thing I'm hoping schools are looking at is they're not the only ones who got money. City of San Antonio and Bexar County alone, over $700 million additional dollars just were received. So this is not just the job of schools to meet the emotional and mental health needs of children and families and educators. It's the job of communities. So I'm hoping schools are in dialogue with their city partners, with their county partners, with CHCS, or community mental health partners, because there's a lot of funds coming. And if we do things together and we plan that together, then we're going to be able to make those advances. And that includes that consortium I talked about, Angie, because UT San Antonio is in a position to be able to provide urgent mental health needs through the TCHAP program for any school that lacks that. And they are backed up by the other 11 medical schools. So it's not just their child psychiatrists and their child specialists. It's really every child psychiatrist in the state through that network is now available. And we're going to have over 2 million Texas students having access to that program when school starts up in the fall. So schools really need to take that into account, the existing funds that are put in at the state level, as well as leveraging these federal funds.
That's really impressive. And that statistic of 90% of it can be handled through telehealth, that's phenomenal. Well, I have one last question, and you each have a little bit less than a minute to respond, but many experts believe that there will be another pandemic. And if you could change one fundamental problem in our local education system before the next pandemic, what would it be? Nick.
Well, I hope you don't consider this cheating, because it's a big fundamental problem. But long before COVID-19, the systems that we had in place to address our schooling were vastly inequitable. We saw that continue. We saw families with means being able to have pandemic pods, hire teachers to make sure that their kiddos were progressing further, faster. And so that is the thing that I would point attention to and go back to what I just said a moment ago. The inequity that we see in our school systems is something that I think has risen to the top of our country's consciousness, certainly in our city's consciousness, and that that would be the thing that I would like to. I know it's a bit of a panacea to answer that way, but I think we have to continue to be giving education the attention it deserves, and to continue to beat the drum of the inequity that we see already baked into the system, so that when we make solutions and we make policy decisions, we're intentionally trying to close those gaps that we see.
Great. Jessica, what's the one big thing you would like to see changed in our local education system before, hopefully not, but the next pandemic?
So I'm going to use the word practical, but it's not easy. It's really the digital divide was a huge barrier. And I think the families that we serve and the communities that we serve have the greatest difficulty in that area. But the digital divide, the reason I say that is just because Andy just talked about, there is so much that can be done with access, and it's not just the technology. It's also the internet service. All that has to be figured out in order to create that equality of opportunity in a crisis or any other time. Because what we've learned the most during this pandemic time, as we are on this setting right now, is that there is a lot of good that can be done with technology, but for those who do not have it in their hands or have access to it, then they are left behind with those opportunities. And so technology can help not only just the education part of it, but it can also support social, emotional, mental health and access to many other resources that are available if we can equalize that opportunity across. And again, schools are hubs, and they can connect to many of our kids and families. So if we can fix it from the school system, it'll impact families from a great area, not just within the child. So that's my one thing.
Good.
Not little.
Andy, a little bit less than a minute. What's your one?
That's fine, yeah. Well, fortunately, Nick and Jessica covered it really well. So I'll just say two things. One is, I don't know if there's going to be another pandemic. I hope not. But there's going to be more natural disasters, and there's going to be more difficulties in children's lives, and inequity is going to take a while to fix. So we just need to be more ready, and we need to recognize that emotional health. And the best way to do that, I think, for us to be more ready is to pretend for a 30-day period that your brain is actually part of your body. Because we don't believe that. At a fundamental level, we do not treat these emotional needs like they're physically rooted. We expect children to shape up. We expect teachers to go in and work after they've been through traumas. We expect people who are suicidal. We don't know, should we talk to them or not? Yeah, you should talk to them. Would you not talk to somebody if they had cancer? I mean, we need to pretend, because if we pretend long enough, then maybe we'll believe it. Because I think at a fundamental level, we have not, I think we all lived it in the last year, but we got to remember that visceral feeling that our emotions are part of our body. Our mental wellness, our emotional wellness is just as physically rooted as any other health condition. So if you could pretend that, I think we would be a much better case going forward.
Excellent. This has been such a great panel. Thank you, Nick, Jessica, and Andy. Really appreciate you and hearing your perspectives. And so this panel is concluding, and please stay on, because we have an equally exciting second panel that's going to be moderated by our education reporter, Brooke Crum, and I believe that's going to start at 12:40. So see you back here really soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So much.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Angie. Welcome to the second panel we have today on teaching and learning in a pandemic. With us today, we have Israel Del Valle, 8th grade math teacher at Maddie Middle School and Southside ISD. We have Bree Jimenez, a high school student in East Central ISD and a youth leader at UP Partnership. And we also have Yvonne Ortiz Perez, a counselor at Hausman Elementary in Northside ISD. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive right in. Let's get started. So you guys have been sort of on the ground, through this pandemic. So let's go around and we'll start with Israel and then Bree and then Yvonne, and just tell us what it was like this past year, switching from remote to in person, and just go ahead, Israel.
It was like 3 years built into one. It felt like starting off, everybody was virtual, and then there was a hybrid, and then we gradually increased our student in face-to-face. So it constantly felt like we were restarting and reinventing the wheel. So this year felt really, really long while we're trying to hold everybody accountable while the pieces kept moving.
Right. Bree, what was it like as a student going through that?
Well, I'm gonna agree. It felt very long at some times. As a student, I was remote, so I didn't go to school for about 3/4 of the year, and I was only in person for about a quarter of the remainder of the year. So I definitely had a bit of both experiences, but at times it did feel long, and I'm just glad that I was able to go back to school because it really did help overall.
Yeah. Yvonne, what was it like, being a counselor?
Oh my God. It was a lot of preparation, a lot of adaptation. We had summer institutes where they were training us on, meeting the needs of our students coming in for in-person and for virtual. We wanted to make sure that we met the social and emotional needs of the kids. And so many trainings on that, many things that we had to learn, like technology. I'm a veteran counselor, and so going back to that technology piece, it was a learning, very, very much a learning experience. But we got it. Working together, just want to commend our guidance and counseling department for all the hard work that they've done in our counseling cohorts. We all banded together, creating lessons to help meet the needs of the kids, because they're coming in from trauma. This was a lot of change for all of us. And first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we build those relationships again, that we met those social emotional needs, prepping presentations for our staff to help them to meet those needs as well, with morning meetings, building those relationships again to ensure that the kids know that they're supported and that they're safe. It's a lot of preparation, a lot of adaptation.
Right. And I think, we all sort of struggled being in front of our computers all day. We encountered many obstacles, whether it was internet access or, that lack of social interaction. And then you had students taking on new responsibilities, as I referred to in the last panel. And you had, like you were saying, Yvonne, you had to adapt so much. So talk about, elaborate on some of these barriers that you faced this school year. Israel, we'll start with you again.
I think one of the biggest barriers was that personal connection that you typically have with students. It's pretty magical what a high five can do, or a pat on the back, or just a simple nod or a thumbs up, to see that kind of interaction that you have with the students. And I think the biggest thing was the technology piece, is to try to figure out how do you do that with technology. I'm not a tech person. I give my phone to my kids. They're the ones that program all my stuff. But having to go through technology to try to reach those students and bridge those relationships was very challenging for us all, from students' point of view, even parents as well. Parents were calling us going, I don't know how to use Google. I don't know how to do these things. So I think technology was the biggest barrier for the parents, for the students, and for the teachers, as well as that physical connection.
Yeah, Israel, how did you work to connect with students virtually?
To me, it was entertaining. We had to try to do things that made it fun and interactive. And we would send home gift cards, or we would send home like little emails. We would make phone calls to the parents. little silly things by keeping them engaged by either wearing costumes, coming in differently, playing games while we were with them. And it kind of just changed the way the format of just standing there and just kind of lecturing for 20 minutes and having them practice for 20 minutes had to change. I really felt what it was like to be a YouTuber. Keeping them engaged, it's difficult, and it's trying to get their focus and in their engagement while you're trying to get content across and teaching technology, whatever you're teaching your subject matter.
Oh, all right. Maybe have a future YouTuber on our hands here. Bree, what was it like? What did you face as a student and to overcome this year?
Well, as a remote student, I think one of my biggest issues that I faced was having to create boundaries because I was at home majority of the school year. So having to create these boundaries of this is my designated school time and this is my designated home time. And I think the trouble with creating these boundaries was that I couldn't really push. I'm like, this is my home. My home is supposed to be my delegated rest time. I'm not supposed to work when I'm at home. So I had to push past this very strong barrier of I have to delegate my time, and it has to be like I'm at a normal school day because I want to still do fun stuff. Like I want to read a book or I want to play on my phone. But the barrier of having to delegate school time and home time, it also kind of led to a spiral of unmotivated attempts at doing my work because I'm still in my home environment. And when you can't really delegate what is school and what is home, when can I rest and when do I have to work, it's very hard to push yourself to work and to complete the work that you were given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yvonne.
I would have to say the same as Israel, just that those interactions, this in-person interactions with the children, especially with counseling, it was difficult. Well, we got creative, but difficult to be able to see the affect of kids, to be able to respond and to help them and support them as best we can. So we had to get creative. We did the virtual counseling in person and as well, but the virtual individual counseling, small groups, and even classroom lessons. Just being very creative. There were a lot of things that I would normally use in my counseling sessions that we couldn't utilize because of safety precautions. And so just researching a lot of good information on things that we could use that are going to be helpful to reach our kids. And that was the main concern, being able to reach the kids and finding other ways of doing that through technology. It was a whole other world this year. And Israel, I agree with you. I'm not a computer savvy person, but I learned to be. And I think that this COVID brought on that tremendously with all of us.
Right. So this week, the state released STAR scores, and I think they're about what we were expecting. Students' scores dropped from 2019, particularly in math and science. And there's been a lot of talk among educators about learning loss this year. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about learning loss. Is it exaggerated? Do you feel like these scores that came out accurately reflect where students are academically? And we'll start with you again, Israel.
Oh, I do believe there was a learning loss. It was about a year and about 3 months. They didn't get to finish off, for me being 8th grade, they didn't get to finish off their 7th grade year. So there was a lot of uncertainty coming into this year, and then obviously teachers having to redesign instruction and how are you going to gauge that. One of the other panelists was saying that we had to change from a teacher's point of view on how we were going to assess that. So either we went from choice boards or multiple different ways of how to turn in assignments just to get the participation and get some kind of feedback from the students. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a drop off. And a lot of that was the accountability piece. Like our panelists had said, that if the student didn't have that structure at home to do the work time, whether it was their strong will or a guiding parent, there was a lot of accountability that was put on the student. And I think that's a hard lesson to learn from the way we finished the year before to this year, going the full year of the students were going to be held accountable to their own work. And the only one that was really going to be held accountable was that student. And I think that was difficult for them. It was difficult for us and for some of the parents that we spoke to. there were too many distractions at home. It was a little bit too comfortable. Some people did not have the equity that other students have. There was not a specific workplace. Some became babysitters, and I think that distracted a lot from the learning. I think they tried the best they could, but in a campus, that's the safe space. That's the one place where it's equalized. Everybody has the same lighting, everybody has the same temperature, everybody has the same work area. And I think that makes learning a lot easier than having to deal with all those little distractions that students had at home. So I think that really hurt the students as far as not only just getting the knowledge, but retaining it.
Sure. I'm sure Bree, you could speak to that.
Definitely. I have to agree with that. It's just the added pressure almost that you have to self-suffice and self-sustain yourself above all the work that they're giving out, along with the potential connectivity problems that you may have, or maybe I didn't even get that assignment. It wasn't assigned to us here on Google Classroom. And then there were some days where Google Classroom itself would just not be up to working. And so it'd be up to the students to kind of have to teach themselves that day what that curriculum was. And so on that days when we would have to self-teach, there was an added layer of pressure. What if I'm not teaching myself this right? Isn't the teacher supposed to help us? And then it's also having to set aside the time to practice it with the class when you're not really there to have the teacher's help, and they're having to check the chat whenever you may pose a question because you're not really there to raise your hand and ask it. And so I think it was definitely hard to get the same experience, and that added level of just pressure and stress really did add to the learning loss that I think a lot of students face, whether it be because of the connectivity issues, their ability to give themselves motivation, or even just staying disciplined with their work. It's a very hard deal to do, especially in home where you're supposed to be. It's your fun environment, whereas school is more disciplined.
Right. Yvonne, what's your take on this?
I'm going to speak from a counseling perspective. This is the very first time we're experiencing and navigating through uncharted territory. There's been a lot of different changes, a lot of transitions within families, family members losing jobs, family loss, a lot of variables that were into play. And I think, yes, it was a reality, but there were variables that took place that we needed to address. We needed to meet those needs before, there's a saying, you can't do the Blooms without meeting the needs, meeting the Maslow's, the basic needs of children, the basic needs of families, which is food. The main thing I was doing and we were doing as counselors in March was making sure that families had the food that they needed, making sure that they had the financial assistance that they needed. And families working 2 jobs or families trying to find financial assistance. Those were the kinds of things that we were reaching out to families to help them to gain access to those resources. And yes, we did talk with them about getting online and ensuring that they tried to do the assignments. But as a counselor, I have to say that was secondary. I wanted to make sure that our families were safe, were having their basic needs being met. Our students were having their basic needs being met, because it's so difficult for them to even concentrate if they don't even have food on the table, if they don't have breakfast, they don't have a parent there to involve themselves to help them with the lessons when they don't understand. And I want to say kudos, I just commend all the educators, because they went above and beyond in reaching our families. We did, all of us working together from top to bottom, the admin, our TSS, our counselors, our office staff, custodians, everyone. It took everyone working together to help to meet the needs of these students. And I think we need to kind of see it in that perspective, because this was so brand new to us. And I think we did our very, very best.
Right. A lot of educators have talked to me about, yes, maybe students fell behind academically, but they developed other skills, going through this difficult time. What have you guys seen? Maybe we'll start with Bree this time, and you could tell us a little bit about, you talked about setting boundaries. How else did you adapt during this pandemic?
Well, other skills besides just basic time management, I really had to learn that one, setting boundaries. I think something that educators along with students really gained was empathy. I think throughout the entirety of this year, we really were on the same playing field. It was a new experience for all of us. We were all enduring new things, whether that be at school or at home. So I think there was this added level of just hearing what people had to say and really taking it into account. There was this understanding because we had all gone through it. We're all going through it. And it was this understanding that really allowed students and teachers to connect at a level that I don't really think that they've ever connected on before. It was this shared understanding of experience. And through this shared understanding of experience, there was that empathy. I understand what you're going through. And then through understanding, I think there was a lot of checking in on people, which I think is extremely important, whether it be their emotional needs, their mental health needs. I think that was really pushed forth because it was important that we knew how people were doing because we know how rough that time was. And I think that that was just a skill that I would like to see carried out more, but it was really gained for everyone within the school communities.
Yeah. Yvonne, you're nodding. Want to jump in here?
I agree. I agree with you, Bree, because it was that human connection that the students needed. They needed to know that they were important. They needed to know that they were validated. And yes, they were needing to learn, yes, but first and foremost, that connection, those relationships. In fact, that's what we prepped for at the beginning is we did faculty presentations to help them to regain those relationships again, to make those contacts, even though many of them were distant learners. We wanted those connections to still be made through morning meetings where they do feelings check-ins to see how the child is doing. And that was good information for counselors because, those feelings check-ins, the teacher would follow up with us and we were able to help those students who were having tough days, were having difficulty logging on because of other issues going on in their families. And it took all of us working together. I think that's what we came away with, was the knowledge that we're all here for each other. We're all here to support one another in every aspect of learning. I love that saying, "Together we rise." That's a big, it speaks close to my heart when I say, and that's basically what we did this year. We rose together.
Yeah. Israel, what skills did you see your students develop that maybe, you wouldn't have seen in a normal year?
I think the technology piece was important. The ability to know how to use an email now, other than just to sign up for free accounts, but actually learn how to communicate in the digital world. I think the importance of education and technology being integrated as they move forward, having that one-on-one technology now, continuing through high school and through college. I remember a lot of times we made references to like, man, if you guys are getting this, when you guys get to college, you guys can take online classes and it'll be easy for you because now you have all the experience on how to communicate, how to troubleshoot. Like Bree was saying, how can you self-teach yourself? Maybe the lesson was posted, but maybe you didn't get it, but can you go back and watch the video or get the notes? The ability to kind of take the ownership of their education. And the biggest thing that I got out of it was there's a new way now to educate. Teachers went through it, students went through it, and I think there's more ways now that students can feel that they're empowered to get their education. And I think that education and technology piece being integrated going forward, hopefully they can use that because technology is not going away.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can all agree on that. It's not going to go away. And with students developing these skills, I think that's part of, probably some of the changes we're going to see continue. But there were a lot of changes. Yvonne, you talked about the counseling aspects. What changes as a result of COVID would you like to see stay or maybe be expanded upon in the coming school years? Yvonne, do you want to start? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I know I've talked about that with my cohorts. Light bulbs went on. We would have, there's a program called Response to Intervention, and it's an intervention program to help children be successful in learning when they're struggling. And we meet at tier 3s and invite families, parents to attend the meetings. And in the past, before COVID, it was difficult to sometimes get parents in person for the meetings. Never realized that, we can do that through a Zoom meeting. We can have them be at work and they can come during their conference time or their lunchtime, whatever time's convenient for them, and still be present and be able to attend their child's meeting. And I thought that was, nobody realizes that until it's, you're forced to be put in that position. And then family events, parent coffees that we normally have in person, there's times that we don't have very much in attendance. Who would have known that you could videotape and have this on virtual through a Zoom or even through Facebook Live? Lots of different avenues to now look at. And I would love to continue to expand on that and talk about that with our administrators to see how we can make this happen so that more family involvement is occurring for the year.
Yeah, I mean, why is that so important to have family involvement in education?
We're all a village. It takes a village to be able to educate our students. It needs our parents and families being on the same page with the educators, working together, being in the know, knowing where their children are academically, socially, emotionally. I think it's very important that we make those connections with families every day, because it's not just the educators that are educating their child. The families are involved tremendously, and we want parents to know that our school is open, even though we are not completely open. That we are open to having their involvement and their input, and to help them to know that it's not just educators alone. It's all of us together.
Right. Israel, what changes did you see this year that you would like to keep or maybe expand as an educator?
I just kind of want to piggyback off of what Yvonne had said, and what the panelists before us had said, that the school is a hub. And it's not just a hub for the students, it's a hub for the community. And I think having those needs of the community addressed through the schools, whether it's giving out vaccines, giving tests, things like the social emotional needs, the counselors actually getting their own classroom, and they themselves, reaching out to the students to where they felt that they had a one-on-one connection, not just when you had a traumatic experience, but you had a daily communication with our school counselors. I like that piece. Also the asynchronous part, the part like, yeah, I don't know why we never thought of that. We had kids that would be out of town or be sick or going to be in the hospital for a while. And we're just like, well, you're going to have to make all this work up when you come back. But having those lessons, recorded, having videos. So this way, when students are going to miss, they still have that opportunity to take the ownership of their education and not necessarily be behind. Even though they're not physically in school, they don't necessarily miss all the content. So I would like those pieces to stay in, to have that outreach and to continue to have that ownership of the students being involved in their education.
Yeah. Bree, what about you?
So something that I really saw that I as a student and as a youth in general in a community really liked and would like to see expanded on was the platform that youth were given to share the experiences. And whether this youth voice be what changes did you not like, or what changes could you see within the virtual environment or within our school environment. And I think that is something so important, is to hear how the youth are responding to their environment, because that is the environment that they're learning in. That's how they're shaping themselves for the future. And if they're not really taking in the environment in a positive way or in a connotation, you can't really help them that much if they're not taking it and working with it. And then I recently joined in Our Tomorrow Youth Summit, and through this, the youth really brought to experience how they felt their school environment and how they really reacted to it. And I know that a lot of them said that youth voice was very important to share, because they believed that all youth really need to have their voices heard. And through their voices being heard, you have a community being formed. You have the teachers being heard, community members of the school, and through it you create like this trinity of unity and work. And I think it's more of just not just hearing youth voices and putting forth a vision or a hope of what their voice could become, but a plan of action. How can their voices be used? How can it be used into the system, into the schools? Maybe how can we bring their voices past the school? How can we put them in the school boards? Maybe help them share their experiences and their overall views of the school to the people who really make the big decisions. And I would really like to see youth voice expanded upon and heard more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Yvonne said, it takes a village. And you know, something they touched on the previous panel was this influx of money that schools are getting, and an unprecedented amount, sort of the word of the year, right? So these things that you've mentioned, if you could use this money for anything at all, no limits, you know, what would you implement right away? And we can start with you again, Bree.
So I'm a very big advocate for mental health, and I think that mental health was something that we all experienced through this year and this unprecedented time. But I think that if we could really institutionalize the money into our schools, and how can we help mental health, whether this be screenings, how are the kids as well as the staff doing? I think we really need to focus on hearing and helping the staff so that they can help the youth too. It's like this kind of sequence of events. The youth can't help themselves. So if the staff were to be educated in what are some healthy coping mechanisms, what are the signs to look out for, but fundamentally, how can I take care of myself so that I can help take care of others? So I'd really like to see maybe screenings within the school, overall mental health resources, maybe counselors coming in, certified clinicians coming in, because this was a year where we faced a lot of things. There were job losses. I personally lost a family member. And I think that if we have this understanding and these resources available, that we can just push forth the work even more and have a really healthy, safe environment where we all work in unison as clinicians, students, and overall staff.
Yeah. Yvonne, what about you?
Bree, I think that's incredible. I'm so glad at such a young age you understand that mental health is very important. I know I've worked previously with communities and schools and worked with a wonderful on-site therapist, Lynn Sokolowski, who would travel with different schools to help meet those needs. I think it would be wonderful if we had more involvement in the mental health area with LPCs, with clinicians, people that helping with self-care for our faculty, even for the students. You know, we need more of that, especially now. The aftermath of what COVID has done. You know, we don't even know the exact amount of things that we are needing to focus on, but right now it is our mental health, it is our self-care to ensure that we are our best for our students and for the students to be their own personal best, to be successful at school.
Right. Israel, if you could spend a bunch of money at your school, what would you spend it on right now?
I like the idea of the mental health. We initiated a program called Second Step, and this was our second year rolling with it. And the first year was kind of wonky as we rolled out, but it was very critical this year to have that awareness of what's going around you other than just the education part. You know, the relationships with the parents, the relationship with peers, the relationships with teachers, with admin, with coaches, to give those students that safe space to talk. I think districts going out and finding programs like that, bringing in extra counselors. I think having extra after school activities for students. I think having that community, that hub of where parents can come and get educated, where students can further their education or make up, time or an athletic. We did like a chess club and it grew from like 2 students to like 13 kids. And it was just a place to socialize just because they had missed that connection. I think having the schools have programs that are outside of your core content to include the families, to include faculty, but also to include the people of the community, to go and educate themselves, but mostly to get those connections, to build those bridges of that mental health. Because I think if we're all in it together, I think we're all looking out for one another. I think so many times the parents, the students, the faculty, they're all these isolated events that only meet for 45 minutes at a time. But this year showed us that we're all involved in this together. So I think the more that we can incorporate programs like that, whether it's bringing in more teachers or more counselors or more programs for after school, I think that would be a great place to put our money into our community.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you all mentioned mental health, and no one was like, we need more time in school, tutoring and stuff. But looking forward to next year, where it appears that everyone will be in person, what are you guys looking forward to? And I guess, we can kind of take a few minutes each for that as kind of our final thought, and anything else you want to add. So Yvonne, let's start with you. Oh, you're on mute again.
There we go. Just looking forward to making those connections again, letting the children know that we're all there for them. We saw how much COVID brought out the caring and humanitarian sides in all of us. I know that together we're going to continue to work for the benefit and the welfare of our students, including their families and our community, and on a bigger scale, our whole world. I think it's going to be a good thing. And we saw it. It brings a warm fuzzy to my heart seeing all the different things that people, it brought out of them. And I love to focus on that. I saw a lot, and even our kids. That was the warm thing, that even our kids interacting and caring for each other, and knowing that, just like what we said, we're all in this together.
Right. Brooke, final thoughts?
So for the upcoming year, I'm really looking forward to getting more of that in my environment, because when I went to school for like the last quarter of the year, I developed social anxiety over the course of quarantine because I hadn't interacted with anyone. So going back to school where there's still a percentage of people there, I still had a social shock because I couldn't really interact with people because I didn't know how. I only ever was in my house. But coming into the upcoming year, I'm really looking forward to just making better steps towards having more conversations that are healthy and not really anxiety strucken. But I'm really looking forward to that, as well as just having, like both of you had said, connections with my teachers. It makes learning so much more enjoyable to have a connection with your teacher and just be in the environment with teachers and classmates, whether it be cracking a joke, or maybe when a minute of downtime, you just whisper to a friend, because it's just nice to know that you're surrounded by people who are doing the same thing as you. And like Israel had said, in the same environment, same temperature. It doesn't really seem like a lot, but it creates a cohesive environment that really makes you feel more at home and calmer, I think. So I'm really looking forward to being back in that.
Awesome. Well, I visited Israel's classroom for a story, so I know he is a jokester and he's great at engaging his students. So are you looking forward to being back in there and doing more of that next year?
I am. I think the biggest thing is to have that honest conversation with our students and go, hey, like, let's be honest. We struggled as teachers last year. I know you guys struggled as students last year. We got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of ground to make up. So we really don't have a lot of time to waste this year. So I think having those conversations that, like, look, we're really going to have some high expectations, but we're going to support you. We're going to embrace you because we went through the craziest year together. We'll go through this year together as well. And things will start to look a little bit more normal, and we'll start to build those relationships back, and then kind of help teach them, kind of like Bree said, how do you socialize again when you haven't socialized before in a while, where your basketball games were only your 8 parents there. And so I think the biggest thing for me is just having that reset, having those honest conversations about, not taking things for granted. They saw how difficult it was to teach. Parents saw how difficult it was to teach as they became at-home teachers. So I think there's a newfound respect for the student, for the teachers, for the admin, for the counselors, but more importantly, for the idea of education, something that was just kind of is given freely in our country, that they turn around and say, like, this was really hard to do this year. So going forward, take this opportunity that we have and make the best of it. From the teacher's point of view and from the student's point of view, is this is our chance to kind of rise and shine.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for participating in our panel today. It was great to hear from you, and I good luck next school year. And we'll also thank our 2020 Mike and Louise Burke and Pre-K for SA. Thank you for your sponsorship, as well as our gold sponsors, the Gambrinus Company, First Mark Credit Union, Schulman, Lopez, Hoffer, and Edelstein LLP, Idea Public Schools, Valero, and the Charles Butt Foundation. And thank you to our silver and bronze sponsors for making this year's event free for all attend. If you enjoyed this panel and the one before it, please consider donating to the San Antonio Report. We are a nonprofit newsroom, and we rely on your donations to continue providing you local journalism, or you can just sign up for free for our newsletters and continue to receive news about education and many other things going on in San Antonio. But we need your help, so please consider donating. Our final event in our Education Forum series is going to be August 11th. It's going to be on the future of higher education and workforce development. It'll be at noon again on August 11th. So I hope you can join us for that one as well. And thank you for joining us today and for your support of the San Antonio Report.